Welcome back for Chapter 2 of No Flying in the House. Mrs. Van Court treated Gloria like a queen. For Gloria's convenience, she had the nursery bell lowered. Gloria could ring for anything she needed. Her knowledge is fantastic, Mrs. Van Court told Miss Peach. Did you know that she can discuss any subject in any language? She won't speak even one language when strangers are around, said Miss Peach. I asked her a question in front of the grocery boy, and she barked at me. The servants have promised to keep her secret, said Mrs. Van Court. And they will, said Miss Peach. Everyone loves Gloria. Charles takes her in the car wherever she wants to go. Cook sends up special tidbits after a party. I've been playing checkers with her. She moves the pieces with her mouth. Who wins? Gloria. The little dog's devotion to Annabel was so great that she never allowed her performances to interfere with her care of the child. One afternoon, Mrs. Van Court waited impatiently in the drawing room, full of guests for Gloria to appear. At last, she sent Miss Peach to the nursery. Please hurry, said Miss Peach to Gloria. Everyone is asking for you. Gloria shook her head. Annabel has a fever. Dr. Watkins is on his way over. Tell Mrs. Van Court I can't leave Annabel. But we're entertaining a baroness and a governor, Miss Peach said. Gloria refused to leave. Annabel comes first, she said. Even if we're entertaining the president, Annabel comes first. Gloria taught Annabel to wash behind her ears and to put away her toys. Sitting on Annabel's shoulder, she read to the child, taught her to play games, and heard her prayers. She took her for walks, swam beside her at the beach, and sat in her lap when she was in the dentist's chair. She even allowed Annabel to dress her in doll clothes and to take her out in a doll carriage. Mrs. Van Court became accustomed to having a child in the house. Her visits to the nursery were rare. She never held Annabel in her lap or even held her hand on walks. But when there were no guests, Annabel was permitted to join Mrs. Van Court and Gloria for afternoon tea by the fire in the sitting room, or for early supper in the great candlelit dining room. By the time she was 6, because of her association with Gloria, Annabel had developed such respect for small things that Mrs. Van Court allowed her to enter the drawing room unattended. It was an elegant room with a crystal chandelier, an aubusson rug, and antique French furniture. Around the walls, gold and glass curio cabinets housed Mrs. Van Court's famous animal collection. Some of the animals carved from jade and ivory were hundreds of years old. Some, like the white mouse with ruby eyes, were enameled and studded with precious jewels. But the most famous were the golden toys made for kings and emperors, with wind-up keys in their back to make them move. Of all the golden toys in Mrs. Van Court's collection, Annabel's favorite was a swan, a gold swan with diamond eyes and an ivory beak. When it was wound up, it spread its wings and stretched its graceful neck in every direction. Gloria's favorite, a hippopotamus dressed as an organ grinder, played a tune while tiny monkeys with a ruby collar danced on his shoulder. Of course, Mrs. Van Court never let anyone, not even Miss Peach, touch the contents of her cabinets, but it gave her the greatest pleasure to bring out the small jeweled objects of enameled gold for Annabel and Gloria to admire at a respectful distance. They're worth the king's ransom, Miss Peach told Annabel, but she'd swap them all for another like Gloria. One rainy afternoon, Mrs. Van Court and Gloria went shopping, leaving Annabel in the care of Miss Peach. While the housekeeper sorted sheets in the linen closet, Annabel slipped away and went into the drawing room alone. Cold shadows crowded the big room, usually so bright on the clear day. Wind-driven rain tapping against the glass doors sounded as though it was trying to invade the house. She could hear the rain dripping down the chimney into the black fireplace. Annabel shivered. Suddenly, a door from the terrace banged open. A cold, wet blast swept into the room. The chandelier tinkled like a wind chime. Annabel put her hand over her mouth. Out on the terrace, the wind and rain slashed about as though they were arguing over which would enter first. The curtains flapped into the room like sails. Gathering her courage, Annabel moved to the door and tried to close it. She battled the curtains. With all her strength, she pushed. At last, the door closed. To her surprise, on turning back into the room, she saw that the door to one of the gold cabinets had come open. Keeping to the center of the room, to avoid the shadowy spots along the walls, Annabel went to close it. Inside the cabinet, her favorite swan held its wings poised as if ready for flight. Annabel knew better than to touch it. Even under Miss Van Court's supervision, she had never been allowed to so much as stroke it with a finger. Glancing around to make sure she was alone, Annabel reached for the tiny swan. Its diamond eyes glittered. It felt strangely cold, not at all as she had supposed its bright gold body would feel. Wonderingly, she turned it over in her hand. Every part was exquisitely molded, from its ivory beak to its gold-webbed feet. Carefully, just as she had seen Mrs. Van Court do, Annabel wound the key in its back. The swan began moving its wings and stretching its neck. Delighted, Annabel waited for it to stop, then wound it up again. This time, just as she lifted her hand from the key, she heard a terrible grinding. The swan's neck jerked once and sagged. Annabel shook it. Nothing moved. She shook it again. How could it break? She had been so careful, just like Mrs. Van Court always was. Close to tears, she shoved the swan back into place on its glass shelf and started to close the door. "Now you'll catch it," said a small voice, clearly from inside the gold cabinet. "You know Mrs. Van Court has told you never to touch her things." Annabel's first thought was to scream for Miss Peach. Backing away, she realized that since the voice was coming from the cabinet, it had to belong to something smaller than she. Bravely, she stepped closer, peering through the open cabinet door. There, crouched on the second shelf in a spot she was sure had previously been empty, was a little enameled gold cat with emerald eyes. "Who are you?" Annabel asked. "I don't remember seeing you there before." The cat swished its golden tail. "I just came out of the weather," it said. "How did you open the terrace door?" Annabel remembered it had taken all her strength to close it. The cat shrugged, rolling its emerald eyes. "I'm not a real cat." "I can see that," Annabel giggled. "Imagine a gold toy thinking it was real." "No, you can't. All you see is a cat. And that isn't me at all. On the other hand," said the cat, "when I look at you, I don't see a little girl named Annabel." Annabel looked down at herself. "If you don't see a little girl," she asked, "then what do you see?" "A fairy," said the cat. Shaking her head, Annabel laughed. "You don't make sense." The cat smiled, swishing its tail again. "Neither do you." Annabel leaned closer. "But I'm not a fairy." "You're Annabel Tippins, aren't you?" asked the cat. Annabel nodded. "How did it know her name?" "And Princess Felicia's dog, Gloria, is your guardian." "Who is Princess Felicia?" asked Annabel. The cat sniffed irritably. "Don't you know anything? For a fairy, you're terribly dull." "But I'm not a fairy," insisted Annabel. "Do you know Gloria?" The cat laughed, rather an evil laugh. Annabel thought. "I suppose you're going to tell me Gloria isn't a dog," exclaimed Annabel. The cat yawned. "You're brighter than I thought." This time it was Annabel's turn to laugh. If Gloria isn't a dog, she would have told me. You're terribly mixed up to get straight. To get straight, you should admit to yourself right off that you're a cat. A toy one, I mean. Cats are really very nice. I like cats. You're only saying that because you don't want me to tell Mrs. Van Court about the swan. For a moment, Annabel had forgotten the swan. I can fix it, said the cat, if you promise not to tell the household of my visit today. I'll fix the swan so you, Mrs. Van Court, will never know it was broken. Annabel wasn't sure she should trust the cat, but she had no choice. If only you could. Do you promise? She promised gratefully. Don't forget, said the cat, if you ever tell anyone in the house of my visit, that swan will immediately break into 1,567 pieces. Annabel didn't want to think about it. I won't forget, she said. Now, said the cat, you'd better be getting back to the nursery before you're missed. Leave the cabinet door ajar. I'll close it as I leave. You're going out? I didn't think cats like storms. They don't. Excuse me, Annabel smiled. I forgot you aren't a cat. Will you be coming back? Offended, the cat sniffed. Perhaps, when you're old enough to hold an intelligent conversation. Turning its back on Annabel, the cat refused to say another word. All the way upstairs, Annabel wished she had asked the cat more questions. On the landing, she started to return, but Miss Peach called her to the nursery. I'll bring you a cup of chocolate and read you a story, she promised. Annabel chose her favorite book, and when she was comfortably arranged in Miss Peach's lap, she opened it to the first story. Miss Peach smiled at the pictures. This was Tommy's favorite, too, she said. Was Tommy Mrs. Van Court's son? Asked Annabel. For as long as she could remember, she had seen hanging in the stair hall a large portrait of Mrs. Van Court's husband, who had died many years ago. A boy leaned against his knee. Once, when she questioned Gloria about it, the little dog cautioned her about prying into matters that were none of her business. He was her only son, said Miss Peach. Is he the one in the picture? Miss Peach nodded. We don't mention him outside the family, and never in front of Mrs. Van Court. He ran away. She shook her head sadly. No trace of him was ever found. This room was his nursery. Annabel had guessed as much. When did he run away? Long ago. He was almost grown up, Miss Peach shook her head. Left in the middle of the night, poor dear. Always believing his mother loved those golden toys in the drawing room more than she loved him. Didn't she? Miss Peach chuckled like an excited hen. Mrs. Van Court adored the boy, but you know how she is about those toys. The night he left, he broke her favorite. Though it was an accident, she was wildly angry. You know she never lets anyone touch her things. Annabel nodded guiltily, hoping the swan was now repaired. She hated to think that what Mrs. Van Court would do if she discovered it was broken. Which one did he break? She asked. It isn't there anymore, said Miss Peach. When Tommy left, he took the pieces with him. She smiled a sad little smile and offered Annabel a peppermint from her pocket. I can still remember its emerald eyes glittering there on the floor among the broken pieces. Was it a pretty one? Miss Peach nodded. The prettiest, I thought, in fact. It was my favorite, too. Did it wind up? Oh my, yes, it even swished its tail. It was a fancy one. Annabel sat up. She shivered. Its tail? She whispered. What sort of toy was it? Seeing her shiver, Miss Peach felt Annabel's forehead. Don't tell me you're catching a cold with school starting a week from Tuesday. Please, Miss Peach, begged Annabel. Was it a cat? A good guess, said Miss Peach. It was indeed a cat. A little golden cat with emerald eyes. And that's the end of chapter 2.